Yeah, hello everyone. Okay, now it probably works. Yeah, so I had the weirdest technical issue. With 30 seconds left, my monitor decided it wasn't receiving any signals. So that wasn't good. Um, yeah. Hi everyone. Actually, my I could stream like without my monitor, except that would mess up all the cropping because like all the stuff is cropped. So yeah, that's yeah. Hey everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So yeah, this time, a little bit late, but okay. Yeah, so let me introduce the topic a little bit, I guess. So, someone in chat, I think Yakago said something. Oh, stone efficiency and Sente sounds like two lectures in one. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about what stone efficiency is, hopefully, and eventually tie that into Sente, and I'm going to make the case for why they're sort of similar. And I'm going to be using some theoretical examples from, just Josekis and eventually I'm going to show some real game examples also, so I hope we can tie everything together little by little. If we have time at the end, I want to discuss a Go variant, which is really fun. That's related to Sente. Yeah, so let's start. I'm going to ask the audience a question about a couple of different Josekis and what you may think of them. So the first one would be this one. I think probably some of you know it. This is my guess. I'd be pretty sure that a lot of you know this this Joseki. I'm gonna play it out slowly, and I'd be really interested in seeing what you guys' opinions are on the Joseki. So this one it originates with black playing Q17, white approaches, and then black pincers. And this is a Joseki I've played many times. The first time, yes, actually, Black Bull says, yeah, I had it in my last NGD game, and I commented it on my last NGD game. Well, your last NGD game. So I actually was the one who did the commentary for that game, and I talked a lot about this Joseki, and it's related to Sente. So for the moment, I'm just gonna ask you guys what you think. Then we're gonna talk a little bit about theory, and I'm gonna run my mouth, and later we'll stick a pin in this Joseki, and we'll come back and discuss it. Better for white, says LC Alex. Okay. Oh, hello there, Niche. You're flatteringly polite as always. And yeah, so this Joseki starts out with black plays R16, which is a very combative move at first sight, but it's relatively well known. And if white has if black doesn't have the ladder, white can turn, which is a different Joseki altogether. And the idea is that black would usually be able to fight, I believe, with this move, which threatens A and B. But of course, black isn't threatening A and B if the ladder at A doesn't work. So then black has to do something else, and that's considered good for white. Assuming black has the ladder, white has to capture. Black captures, black can also connect here. And we get this old Joseki shape, which is not that much in vogue these days. And it seems that some people like it for white. I have to say, I've played this as black since I was very young. I didn't. So I've played it since 2015, I think, and I didn't know it was a Joseki. The first time I played this, I didn't know it was a Joseki. I just liked it for black, and I played it. I prefer black, who's absolutely alive, and white has a cutting point. Yeah, white has Sente though. Okay, so you're touching on a lot of ideas that we're going to come back to. They're still Aji in white shape, as far as I know. Yeah, so I'm very partial to Josekis where the opponent still has a shape problem, or like where you're really thick. And the price of that is usually Sente, which is, part of what we're going to discuss. So, okay, lots of good ideas. I think the interesting thing is that white does get Sente, so white feels good. But later, I think black feels good, because black has more Aji. But yeah, we'll come back to this Joseki. Okay, let's look at the second Joseki I wanted to ask about. And this one, I guess maybe not absolutely everyone here knows it, but it's still a relatively common shape. So it starts with black making a corner enclosure. This Joseki actually also relies on a ladder working. So it's white attaches, and then black can play e4, and white like sort of tries to colonize the corner, let's say. And you know, black can give the corner, but black chooses to fight. And what happens is that black is really fighting hard for this corner, but gives white some, counterplay on the outside. And we get this position. And this position, I've played this Joseki many, many times. And actually, it was very popular back when I was studying in China. A lot of the kids really, really liked this one. And again, I'd be interested in taking a little bit of a like poll in the chat to see what people prefer, because I'm quite curious. I'll say one of the reasons I thought of this Joseki for the purpose of this lecture was that this Joseki was really well liked for black. Oh wait, black doesn't need to defend. Wait, I'm dumb. Yeah, this move isn't necessary. Yeah, true. This move is unnecessary. Actually, the reason I added this move is weird. So if you start with black, there's a different Joseki which is very similar, which is this. And then black does have to add a move. And this one I believe is also a Joseki. Except black has a little bit more of a shape problem. But yeah, and I don't know why I mixed them up when I was writing the Joseki out. Yeah, thanks for the reminder, guys. I like black here, lots of points, and there's still c8, which might be troublesome later. Okay. I usually like black because I got crushed too often from the other variation. Okay. Maybe a bit better for black. Black can still get out. Jeff told me to attach before move 10 if at all. Afterwards, white has a better idea of which side he wants to block. I think you mean, yeah, this is something Jeff has told me also, because Marcel is Jeff's private student. I'm also Jeff's private student. And Jeff, I think Jeff's opinion is that if you want to attach to this type of corner, you have to do it early in the game because your opponent makes an uninformed decision. So, yeah, like, you're making your opponent choose the direction of play, so you'd rather do it earlier rather than later. Okay, everyone, like, a lot of people like black, and one of the reasons, I think, is... And we can look at both of these Josekis in, well, like this. We can look at both of these Josekis in, as relatively similar, because black, for example, here... And a lot of kids in the Chinese Go school that I went to used to do this. They'd actually play f5. So they take Gote here, which it is a big move. Okay, I think it's nice for white to get that outside for the corner enclosure. So I see a tendency for people to like black, and I'm going to come back to that a bit later. So I've taken the poll, I guess. For the first Joseki, I got the impression that some people kind of liked black. LCO Alex did say it's better for white. And AI does think this Joseki is better for white, this other one over here. Conversely, I think this one's kind of a modern... No, not this one. This one's kind of a modern Joseki. And you can... I sort of forgot that black already has 2 moves in that corner. Okay, yes. Thank you. That's exactly the point we're going to get back to. So... Yeah, Najee is completely right. And, or let's say, right is a strong word. Najee is touching on the point that I wanted to discuss. Black has more moves in this corner. So, in my opinion, there's a little bit of a bias towards black in this type of Joseki position. I get the impression this is also locally a bit better for white. Yeah, I do too. Actually, in the past, I felt strongly enough about this Joseki that I've considered it objectively better for white, like not a Joseki. And Antti and Jeff sort of talked me out of that. But, I still think I still think I like white. I guess it's playable for black, but a lot of people really like black here. Like the kids in the Chinese girls' school, they'll take black all day. They play this immediately as black. So I've had white in this position many times. Okay, so now we've discussed these two Josekis, and we're gonna come back to them in a second. Now, the first, let's say, really theoretical question I want to ask, and this is actually a question I have asked to a bunch of beginner students. So I was teaching a class for, beginner students, and they were roughly 22Q to 16Q. And I asked them this really, apparently simple question. Would you rather have a stone at A? Or would you rather have these two stones? Okay, let's put them on the same. Or would you rather have these two stones on the board? Which would you prefer? And it's a little bit of a trick question. And I didn't expect anyone in the class, I mean, they're, 22 to 16Q, to answer this correctly. Neither. A. Okay, a lot of people are saying A. And I'd love, what's not to like about two moves over one? Yeah, that's the thing, right? It depends on which perspective you're thinking about it. If you just said, would you rather start the game with a stone at A or a stone at B and C? Obviously, you'd rather start with a stone at B and C, right? Obviously. Right? If you got to choose, well, you start the game with this extra stone at J4, that's less than having the extra stones at J16, K16. However, the trick in the question, which I didn't really expect anyone to find, at least from this 16 to 22Q people I asked, is, well, black played two moves in the second case. So if you actually had to invest the moves to play at B and C, that isn't very good. And actually, one of these guys surprised me. He's about 17Q. Probably now he's stronger because he's really smart. And he was like, well, if the stone's at C, that means it's not somewhere else. That's what he said. So that isn't very good. Like, I'd rather have the stone, like, far away, So it's doing something else. And I thought that this was relatively impressive logic from someone who's a beginner. Most people I asked were just like, yeah, I'd rather have two stones there. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I remembered this, and I think that student should get strong. He's got a good mind for Go. Also, they are heavier. Yeah, well, that's another reason you don't put two stones together. It's a little bit of an investment, isn't it? But yeah, this is sort of the first concept that I want to get towards, right? Of course, you could have a move, right? You could add a move next to your previous move, but that means quite simply that the move isn't somewhere else, right? That, yeah. And that's actually, I study economics at, still a, secondary school level. And there's this concept which I think a lot of you will know because it's, kind of in popular culture, which is opportunity cost, right? And the idea is that the cost of whatever you're doing is whatever else you could be doing, or like that's one of the costs, right? So if you were doing something else, well, now you can't do that anymore. And in a turn-based game, that's particularly applicable, because time is extremely tangible. If time is a move, then, and that's the first concept I want to get towards. In Go, I think it's really, really, really important to be aware of the opportunity costs of our moves. And this happens every single game we play. Like, every single move we play for every single game we play. So, let's see. I actually made a slide inspired by Antti, but for some reason the doesn't look so good. Yeah, you're watching a Go lecture rather than having a relaxing walk, for example. Yeah, exactly. So I actually made some slides inspired by Anti's Control Go lecture, which was fantastic from last week. You can watch it on the YouTube channel for the NGD. And yeah, so here's a slide I made. Studies economics and doesn't like territory. Yeah, I like investment. I study economics, right? So this is sort of the idea. You need to think about where else your move could be, you know? And this is something that beginners don't do. Like, beginners very often, right? For example, that class of beginners I taught, they play their moves next to each other. You know, there's this recency bias, and we're going to talk about the recency bias in a little bit more detail later. But you need to be aware of this cost, because it feels like playing a move is free. You can just do it. But opportunity cost is just this very, very, very powerful concept. You could be playing somewhere else. So, yeah. Anyway, so, Marcel says, to be objective, B should have a second move at the bottom next to the first one, but he also has better choices. Yeah, so the fair comparison, so if we go back to here and here, like, it's probably fair, you know, the more fair comparison is, would you rather have a stone here, or would you rather have a stone at J4 and Q4? You know, but that's why it's a tricky question, I guess. Okay, let's get back to the Josekis we were discussing. And here I'm gonna be a bit, I'm gonna share a little bit about my own history with Sente, taking Sente and how I've evaluated Sente. Because all of the Josekis I'm gonna show you, including the first two we asked, that we discussed, those are ones that I've played a lot in my life. And you know, I found that my perception of them changes significantly based on my perception of Sente. Or the perspective of stone efficiency, how many stones are being played in the area, right? So this is, and these two are very closely related. So let's go back to the first one. And, oh wait, I have to get these guys out of here. They don't deserve to exist, okay. No! Okay. There we go. So if we go back to this first one, I've always liked black here. I mean, from the first time I played this Joseki, right? I like black, you know? And one of the reasons I like black is that black has a lot of control, in my opinion. Black has a lot of options. You can cut at A. When you play something like B, the white group is, I mean, it's fine, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. And I like how my shape is rock solid. I really like that in Go. But that's aside the topic of the lecture. We need to look at it from the perspective, like, we need to remember a little bit of a fact, which is that black has one more stone than white, and we can prove it. I mean, black had a stone, then we both started adding stones alternating, and finally black still has one more stone. So of course, when you consider this result, what you need to do is imagine this white stone over here, you know, or imagine a white stone at the next Tenuki point, and ask yourself, well, how is this result? Like, what do I think of this? And that's something that we forget to do because we're looking at the area. And this is something I've been guilty of for the vast majority of my Go career. So, and if I look at most of the Josekis that I like, that I still like, I end in Gote. Like, I have a small list. Like, for example, if you watch some of my competitive games, you'll know I'm the only European player that practices this Joseki for white, basically. And I practice it every time I get the opportunity to, almost. Okay, occasionally I do something different, but, you know, that it's my go-to. And white ends in Gote. And let's say another good example is this one, which you've probably also seen me play because I love it for black. And black ends in Gote. And in all of these situations, black either ends in Gote or overall has more stones than the opponent in the area. And I think that this is something fundamental that, you know, now I like the Josekis because I like the Josekis. I don't think they're better for black or something. But I didn't really consider the Joseki as fairly as I could, especially in the case of ones where black does have a stone majority, like this one, right? It's very hard to think, oh, you should consider this Joseki as this Joseki plus white's move somewhere else. And then your perspective on it changes really significantly. Now, I still play these Josekis because I like thick shapes. I like strong positions. I don't value Sente probably as much as other players. But it's really important to be aware of Sente. And to be aware of every time that you get a result, it's like how many stones were used for this result. And because people don't consider that, there's a tendency to overvalue situations where you have more stones, let's say. So both have power along a side. Black has 8 points, but also has 1 more stone. How much is black's extra move worth here? Huh. I mean, white's extra move, I guess. Yeah, I mean, what I like about this particular Joseki, if you're talking about this one, Marcel, is that black has so much power, as far as I can tell. But I mean, white has a stable group. White's not going to get attacked, not really, you know? But black is ultra solid, which I like. I don't know. It is a Joseki. In my opinion, it's perfectly playable for both. AI says white's slightly better, and I disagree, but you know. Okay, now let's go back and talk about this one for a second, because for me, this is the most blatant example of people overestimating their, like, the value of their value in the value that they got out of a sequence based on the amount of moves. So if we go to this one, this is the wrong Joseki actually, or it's also a good Joseki. Many people, right, add a move here, and I've seen this in so many kids games. They like adding a move here, and it helps for the purpose of illustration, because as some of you have observed, black has 2 more stones in this area. And I don't think that that's what those kids think. And these kids are pretty strong. Some of them are stronger than me. You know, but what I think in their logic, they look at it and they're like, oh, black has more stones. You know? Sorry, no. That's what they should be doing. They're like, oh, black has more stuff, right? And then the logic that should follow is, well, black has more stones too. So they are looking at, and actually something a lot of kids would do, and if we go back a little bit, what a lot of kids would do is not exchange A for B, and then turn, and then they, like, immediately they'd play here now. And they'd be super happy with themselves. This happens so often. And I've had white in this position plenty of times. And I think the reason this appeals to people is because black has so many more stones. So you're looking at the local situation, and you're like, black has everything, you know? And they're not looking at, well, here white also has everything, you know? That's how it works. And it's very hard to look elsewhere, right, when considering a Joseki. And that's actually one of the reasons that whole board vision is quite important. Yeah. Now I want to talk a little bit about some practical examples, and I'm actually going to use my own games. Because, as I mentioned, I have a slightly suspicious history with evaluating Sente. So for my level, I've not been very good at this throughout my life. And I actually have some recent examples where I didn't think about Sente. You know? I didn't think about, well, who's going to get to play somewhere else? And hopefully from these examples, I'm going to talk a little bit of what I was thinking, and hopefully that... And I'm also going to use some of your examples, by the way, you NGD students. So there's a couple of those games as well. And hopefully we can discuss, well, how can you stop forgetting about Sente? Because I'm very sure that in my cases, as well as these students' cases, we forgot completely about Sente, which is not a good thing. But yeah, let's go back. And actually, oh wait, there's like wait, which game is this? Side note, the value of Sente is 10 to 13 points, almost until the end of middle game, then it drops. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, the value of Sente is very interesting because that's what I want to discuss at the end of the lecture, if we have time, you know? Generally 13 at the start, very gradually goes down. Oh wow, that's fascinating. Actually, I didn't know that, and I'd be very interested in your source for that, or your reasoning. Not that you're wrong, right? Not. I mean, Auntie's probably right, but I'd be very curious nonetheless. There's a Go variant, right? That sort of discusses the value of Sente, right? It lets you, it lets you discuss the value of Komi, and not Komi, of Sente and put a number on it, and that's what we're going to discuss at the end of the lecture. My version is the cost of passing. I see. Well, yeah, well, that is Sente, right? Like, Sente is like, what if it was your opponent's turn to play somewhere else, sort of, in a way. Now, oh, I've studied it with Karago. I have lots of graphs as source data. Wow, that's really cool. If I don't know if we could get a look at that at some point. That's really fun. Wow. So, okay, the first example I wanted to look at is from one of my games, and this game was played in Dublin 2019, nearly 2 years ago. I'm white. No, I'm black. Excuse me. And I'm playing Dominic Bovis, who some of you may know. He's a stronger 6-9 player. About 2 months after this game, I beat him in a tournament and got my promotion to 6-9. So I got my revenge. But this game, I did lose. So I'm black, and the Joseki in question is gonna come up really soon. It's one from a practical game example. And yeah, I played this D3 Joseki, which I don't do anymore. Probably now I'd probably Tanuki or something. But white answered with a slightly unconventional move. I mean, this is Joseki, right? It is a Joseki move, but it was less well known in 2019. Joseki has progressed quickly. And here I had to think, and I made a decision. And actually, I'm quite interested as to what the chat would play here. I'd be curious as to your intuition. And my move is natural, but it isn't good, I think. Not too bad, but it's not good. E4, I'm thinking. Oh, E4. E4, Oder Romanskiego showing he's German. E2. I see. When the board is totally stable, getting 13 points with an endgame move is not bad. Oh, that reminds me. I played a game with Motoki Noguchi once, and he played an endgame move worth about that much. And I was like, wait, that looks kind of small. And then I checked AI, and AI said it was fine. But yeah. Okay, people are thinking about E4. Wow, E4. Huh. E4, I mean, E4 here, and then what's black's plan? Do you want to just connect and give the stone, or do you want to play a ko? Okay. Yeah, connect, and then here. This one's actually, for sure this is playable, yeah. Connect and Sente. Yeah, I think we might play d5. And I think actually, if I were white, would I connect? I guess I wouldn't. I would Tanuki. Right? Wasn't e4 the go-to when white extended? Yes, it is the go-to when white extended. But white didn't extend, white played b4, which is a bit different. So in this shape, this is a very common move. And I think the idea is that if white takes the corner, black has a really flexible shape. And this Atari, it's a little bit easier. Like, this Atari is okay, but white can technically ignore it. One thing I'll mention is that my intuition, and I'm not sure about this, is that, and this is a little bit aside the lecture topic, because I didn't expect you guys to say E4. I expected you guys to say E2. Yeah. And when black Ataris, what I'm concerned about is that white can Tanuki. And when black takes, white doesn't have to connect, white can take. and that has some significant repercussions, like with g2. Of course, it does give black something around b5. So I don't know. This looks playable. So e4 is a move. You could play e4. Why not? What I was thinking was the obvious move is e2, right? A d2 technically also. I think e2 is probably better than d2. E2 is like the basic shape move, and you could also play e4. You guys are probably correct. My move was a very my move had a very primitive mentality to it. I want to play e2, right? Oh, you could tenuki. Well, yeah, you could tenuki. Yeah, I Atari. Yeah. And the idea behind the Atari was quite simple. I play here, he's gonna play here, right? At some point, or maybe even now. And then I'm gonna have to Hane, which is worse than if I Atari first, and now this is worse for him. Because it's like harder for him to play this in Sente. You know? So I had a very simple logic. Now, the issue with this logic for black is that b3 does something. It doesn't just help me, it helps white. Let's say white tenuki'd, black has a really strong shape move, which is e4. And then black's threatening to Atari, which is really powerful, right? So white has a shape problem, and that's why I think almost everyone would play e4 here as white. And now, if black likes, black can Atari, right? And if black likes, black can tenuki, and etc. But I was like, oh, let's just Atari first, you know? And I played here. And then my opponent tenuki'd, and I was like, oh yeah, you can do that. You know? Like, oh yeah, you can play elsewhere. That exists, you know? And then I realized I'd been a little bit stupid. But yeah, that's so that's a slightly embarrassing story. And I was rated about 2540 at the time. I was already, you know. Oh wait, no, Dublin a little bit lower, like 2520. I was like, you know, I was a strong player at the time, like a decently strong player, but still I had this bad habit of not considering Sente, you know. And this would happen to me a lot when I was about 5 done, that I'd play a move, and I was like, how will my opponent answer it? And then I played the move, and usually I'd play a very combative move because I was an aggressive player, and then Lucas Potpera would tenuki every time. And I was like, oh wait, tenuki exists, you know? So this would happen to me a lot, and this is something that I think happens to some people often. It certainly happened to me for a long time. And I think it's been a couple of years now that theoretically I understand that Sente is important, but during the game I'd have trouble visualizing it, you know, and I'd forget, you know? And then I was like, oh, you know? And, you know, this type of bad exchange, right, b3 for c4, is the type of mistake that arises when you forget about Sente, you know? And of course, this isn't such a bad move because white could play e4, right? Like, e4 is a big move, you know? It's not like a small move. So this isn't, practically speaking, a terrible mistake for black, but it is a bad one. Like morally, like, right? Like, it clearly shows a lack of understanding, or lack of, like, application of understanding during the game. Practically speaking, it's not that bad. But yeah, that's one example where I just completely forgot about Sente, and I'm supposed to be a strong player. Now I wouldn't forget about Sente, so this is one of the things I've improved on, and I think I'm getting much better at considering, at least considering Sente. And I'm still a very gote heavy player. I very often take gote, but the difference is that I'm aware, you know. And that's really reshaped, let's say, how I consider sequences like this one that we were discussing earlier, where it's a Joseki, but white has the next move. And by habit, I still like a lot of these Josekis where I have a stone majority, and you have to figure out whether it's worth it. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I still, by habit, like all of these sequences because I've liked them since I was, you know, really young. But I think I've gained a little bit of perspective on whether they're good. I'm still amazed at what kinds of mistakes happen even at 5 down. Well, I mean, to be fair to me, I was really good at other stuff when I was 5 down. So, but yeah, you'd consider that, you'd say that considering Sente is a very basic thing that someone at 5 down level should do. And I sometimes I didn't. Now, throughout the last couple of years, I've become much better at doing this. The less and less did this happen that I just forgot about Sente, and then I remembered. Now I just think about it all the time. One of the reasons I think about it all the time is you guys. So I review your games, and I'll like, oh wow, these pulsers are forgetting about Sente. I never do that. So like I type out my comments, and then every time I'm like Sente, 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 and that actually helps me to gain a sense of responsibility for considering Sente also. So I have to thank you guys also, for helping my go out. Hopefully I help you also. Hopefully. Okay. The next example is from a game of mine with Jeff. I played a training game with Jeff. This was last May. And I didn't have the SGF. I had to dig it out of the KGS archives because I remembered this situation. And I'm black again. And you can see that I'm black because I'm playing this Joseki of mine. Yeah. The more Sente you have, the more likely you are to win. I mean, it depends, right? So, like, the point with Sente, right? If you look at a board, right, and you don't see what the last move was, Sente isn't really a concept, right? Like, you just play the biggest move on the board, right? So the reason the concept of Sente even exists is because there's a recency bias towards what was last played. And what I want to do with this lecture is help to think rationally about how many stones you're investing and what the value of Sente is, and hopefully sort of combat this recency bias we have. So you feel like a god when you get Sente like 10 times and just play it wherever you want. I guess so. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so this game, a little bit further. And this move I do understand it, but it's not a good move. This is aside the point of the lecture. But I'm saying I want to attack this. And now I wouldn't say I want to attack this. But okay, that's how I was thinking back in May 2020. I don't agree with that. I'd either jump at f5 or play j4 or something like that. Okay, Jeff pincered because that makes sense. And we get to this position. I peeped. He didn't want to answer because he's Jeff. And yeah, we got to this really interesting position where we're entering a deal where he wants these 3 stones because he's Jeff. He wants the money, and I want these 2 stones because I'm Oscar. I want the influence. And then we're gonna discuss how this is gonna how this transaction is gonna play out. And it was at this position, I think, that I had to make a sort of decision, right? And I was discussing this with Jeff later. In the game, I played k6 and just got my really solid shape, right? And afterwards, when I talked to Jeff, he was like, well, why didn't you just exchange this and Tenuki? When we reviewed the game. And then I was like, oh wait, I took Gote in this sequence. I'm not kidding. At this point I'm 6 down rated, and about a month after this, I was reviewing games for you guys on Nordic Dojo. So this is a big blind spot I had, and I have it less and less. And actually, I have it less and less to the point where I'm confident enough to make a lecture about this, because now I think about Sente all the time. Being a teacher has helped me extremely with this. Now I'm quite obsessed with Sente. But the less, it's really interesting how for a very long time I had this blind spot where I wasn't really aware, and I think this really happens to a lot of people. Not I think it doesn't happen to everyone, but we all have a little bit of a bias towards recency. Like what's happening recently on the board, we pay attention to it and we focus on it, and it's really interesting how even at what you would consider a master level, 6 dan, I'm supposed to be kind of good. This still happened to me. And now it happens to me less, and that's one of the reasons I'm a better player. I mean, now I'd say it basically doesn't happen at all. Because every lesson with my private student, I'm like, Sente, Sente, Sente. Every NGD review I do, Sente, Sente, Sente. And then eventually I'm learning as well, so... And this is a concept I've understood for a long time, but it's hard to integrate it in our games. We forget very easily. Now, the funny part is that AI agrees with what I did. Right? This is the shock. So AI thinks, well, this group is really strong, And, it doesn't want to attack it, And actually, AI really values having this really strong shape capturing the 2 stones, Wait, 1 second. Thank you. Now, excuse me for that interruption. Now, it really wants to capture these 2 stones. It actually thinks this is worth it. And, with Jeff, I had this discussion at the time, but the dangerous part is that I didn't even consider it. This is the issue, I wasn't like, oh, I lose Sente, but it's worth just capturing the 2 stones solidly, and I have a strong shape, and, that's, this is worth the move. I didn't think like that. I was like, ooh, 2 stones, shiny, And then I was like, oh wait, I took Gote, So that's a very important thing to consider. Coincidentally, I played the right moves. Like, I played okay. And, because Sente was less valuable than Jeff considered it. But just the fact that Jeff thought about Sente, and I didn't, showed that Jeff was a stronger player in understanding than I was at the time, So a lecture about good Gote would be great too. Yeah, that can be a great follow-up lecture. I'm sure I might do it, or another one of the NGD teachers. So this was another moment which was kind of made me think, right? And okay, this is the last of the examples of mine. There's many more. There's many times I've done this, and recently there's not many, so this I'm happy about. Now it's time, like, we've been roasting me for a little bit. It's time to roast you guys. So now it's time for us to look at some NGD games, a couple of them. And I want to discuss, why people took a little bit too long to take Sente. And kept adding moves in an area where they weren't efficient anymore. Okay. And the next game is an NGD game, which took place almost a year ago. So between 2 3-dan players, one of which was in this chat earlier. But yeah, and I reviewed it, and there was this really interesting dynamic. And actually, I'm gonna go to this position, and you'll notice that the last move isn't marked, and there's a reason for that. I want to ask you guys what you would play here. It is white to play, and what types of move would appeal to you guys, because then we're going to look at what the players played and why I think that there was a big bias relating to what the last move was, or what the area of interest previously was. So yeah, that's your homework. What would white play here? Oh darn! Oh, you remember Chaos? Okay, yeah, you remember. I was wondering if you would. Yeah, Tengen. Tengen doesn't seem like a completely serious option. Left side. Okay. No, we're guessing white's move. It is white's turn. The reason that it showed black's move is because I did some fiddling. In order that in order that you wouldn't see the last move. 018. We have a vote 018. 018 is not necessary, I believe, Black Bull. So if we place some move and then black tries to win this, he can't. So yeah. C12, D10. So yeah, we have C12, D10. Very similar ideas. We're taking the left side. And this is actually what I think would be the logical course of action. So we're looking at this board and it's like all the groups are safe, all the groups are happy. What's the biggest side on the board, right? What's the biggest territorial move? You know, like there's nothing urgent. Let's just take the biggest side. I think that this is an instinct that most of us would have, actually. D2 is also fine. I mean, D2 is taking points. It's taking a big corner. You know, this is like, I think that that's quite reasonable also, you know? N12, N6, wait. Tangjia says N6, D2, C12 are top contenders. C12's okay. N6 is a bit confusing. I hope you mean N5. N5's okay, it's just a Sente move. Yeah, N5, I mean, N5 is like, you'd play it and black will probably answer it and the game goes on. So, okay, most people are looking at the left side, and that's the right thing to do. In the game, white pushed at Q9. Now, why is white playing on this small side? Well, let's... You know, what do you think may have been the reason? Well, let's go back a move. Black's previous move was R12. Black played R12. You know? Because P7... Well, actually... Well, the thing is, this group is alive. That's the thing, Roman. It's just alive. Like, this group, I mean, we can look at it. And I don't think it's hard. I mean, these players are 2 to 3 down level. I'm pretty sure they're good enough to tell that this group is locally alive, because even if you get enclosed, which you're not getting enclosed, you can still find ways to get out. You can live even profitably. Like, this isn't like a sad life. This is profitable life. And then you could say, oh, I don't want to get enclosed, but this move is not important. Like, it's in a very empty area. And to reiterate, white, it's still hard to contain white. So white even has a way out. Like, it's... So I think that in this position, it would have been very reasonable to Tanuki, but white answered. And the thing is, it kind of gets worse. Like, you know, they continued playing here. So, and you know, I'm sort of bashing the two players for this, but I mean, I could have done the same thing. Like, it really, the recency bias is very strong. You think about where, like, let's say, where the last move was played. It's I think, a very inherent instinct for a lot of us. So, white played Q9, black played P9, which looks like a shape move. In my opinion, it should still be Tanuki, actually, because black has a pretend moyo, but it's only a pretend moyo. It has lots of cutting points. It's not that great. But okay, black... Oh, wait, black pushed first, sorry. And yeah, now here. And then white again answered, which according to previous logic, you know, isn't that necessary. And then the move that really surprised me at this moment, was that black still came back and added a move. And this one was... Oh, he played here. And this one, to me, was the real head-scratcher, because at this very moment, white doesn't want to revive the stone at A, right? White, I mean, it's a target for black, you know? And I don't really see what black really wants to do in this area. So for me, Tanuki, from a person on the outside perspective, it's really easy to say, please just play somewhere else. But for the players, and this could have happened to me as well, you know, you just played in the same area. And then eventually black plays N10, and then white didn't really find a good move, so I think he Tanuki'd here. And I thought white had a good position after this. I never thought about recency bias. I usually base my thoughts on tempo, feeling, and playing in the big plays. Well, I'm sure a lot of people are more talented at Sente than some others, right? But I do think that, especially you can see this in beginners very prominently, they think about where the last move was played, right? And it's very easy to laugh at beginners because they play the game like this. I mean, not like this, but close, really beginners. But we all do this just on a different level, like we do it on a higher level. And actually, I have a conjecture as to what our thought process is, and I'm going to propose a little bit of an antidote in a little bit. But one more example before that. Anyway, wait, this is so something interesting about this particular game. Yeah, Black probably thought the Tiger Moth was a threat to his potential, and he's right. It does threaten his potential a little bit. But is it threatened so much that he has to add a move? This is the part that didn't occur to him. So he was like, something happened locally, right? Let's react to it and let's play the best move locally. And he played a good move locally. But look at the left side, right? And that, Black's play makes sense in a local sense, not in a global one. Okay, the final example I have a little bit of insight on because this is it's an NGD game, but Black is a student of mine. And again, we're going to go to somewhere where, okay, here, this position. And I'm going to ask you guys to find a move for Black. What do you think is a good move for Black? And this one I think is a much better example, and I also have a little bit of insight because I talked to my student about this position. 3-3. Yeah, 3-3 looks good. It's a big move, right? It's like, again, the logic is very simple. All the groups are strong. All the groups are settled. I mean, this group's a little bit wonky, but it's really hard to attack, right? It's the classic definition of a group that, I mean, it has one eye already. It's really hard to attack. So yeah, you want a Tanuki. You want to play on the big side. You want to play Sansan. You want to play C6. You want to play C13. You have a lot of options, right? Yeah, we agree, right? My review. Yeah, Antti reviewed this game. So, and I think you commented on the next move, Antti, which I appreciate. And I actually reviewed this game with my student after you published that SGF review, which, it's really interesting when I review games because I usually don't do NGD reviews for my private students because I usually review the games with them anyway. So I want them to get insight from someone else, So usually it's fascinating to see what Antti says versus what I say about certain games. Okay. So, in general, people agree let's play on the left side. Black's move was h11. And this is the moment where you'd say, wait, hold up. Why do you play h11? Right? And at the time, right, I asked my student, and he was like, well, I wanted to help the group out, and I was a little bit concerned about this cutting point. And, and about losing this stone, And I was like, well, what about Tanuki? I said something very similar, like, along those lines. What did you think of Tanuki? And he was like, oh. He actually said, like, oh, I didn't think of that. And my student is 1Q1 down level. And, that I found that a very interesting moment because he did exactly what I did. Like what I described I did in previous situations, he did exactly the same thing. And that, I thought that was sort of Tanuki preposterous, yeah. So, I mean, the moment I suggested it to him, he was like, oh, of course. Of course, right? Like, I should play, like, C6, or I should play C3, or I should, but the way that it happened in the game was that they'd been playing a sequence on the top side, right? And it was like very natural for him to continue and just play here. Basically, your first thought should always be, can I Tanuki this? We're gonna get to that. This is the final part of the lecture. and we're gonna discuss this a tiny bit. Yeah. So now I wanted to discuss briefly what I consider to be a little bit of the psychology behind Tanuki. Or actually behind not Tanukiing, right? But behind people playing in the same area, right? And I think, like I said, it has a lot to do with recency bias. We're focused on the part of the board where the last move is played. And I think that this is almost universal to some extent or another for all humans, unless they're really quite strong. And maybe even in those, this is present in small, hard to perceive quantities. Now, when you are really, like, when you're starting out, when you're a beginner, you play moves, like this is the classic, like, a beginner game, like, the game's like the moves follow each other and they play down the board and, nobody Tanukis ever, right? That's the classic, right? And I think as we get a little bit stronger, we realize that moves that we play locally aren't very good. Like, at some point, like I'll give you an example. Let's say we play, let's play this Joseki. Or actually, this Joseki is probably not a good example. Wait, oh, I know a good example. Here, 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 here. Oh, oops. Yeah, so you get to this position, and it's Black's turn, right? And I think if a player is inexperienced enough, right, he'll play S14. S14 is like it's the normal move locally, because you take a stone and you're like, yay, a stone, And then probably a stronger player above a certain level, I'm not quite sure what this level will be, but I'm gonna say around 10Q, stronger than 10Q. And of course, some people that are weaker than 10Q will do this correctly, and some people that are stronger than 10Q won't. They'll be like, well, S14 isn't a very big move, right? I'm gonna do something else. And the stronger we get, the higher the value of a move can get locally. And we still think, oh, maybe that isn't worth it, let's look somewhere else. So, and this is actually how I think my own psychology relating to Sente works. You look for a local move, and then you're like, oh, this move isn't very appetizing, let me do something else, right? And functionally that works, because the stronger and stronger you get, the more often you'll be like, or the more, you'll be close to correct more times when you say, oh, this move doesn't look big enough at the moment, let's think of something else, right? And it does work, this method of deciding to Tanuki, but I think it does have a big problem to it. I'll give you an example. Let's say that some player is like, oh, I'll consider S14, and then they're like, oh yeah, that looks big enough, and they play it. Well, that's bad, right? Now, imagine that this player considered, oh, what if I play here? And then they consider, what if I play here instead? I think most people, okay, let's make it a bit realistic. This is like this. And most people, I think, probably, when faced with the two alternatives, would think, oh, I'd rather play O3. But because we think of the local move first, we don't think of the other example. It's like you have two options, and then you look at one of them and you choose it without knowing the other one. And I think that this is the problem with how a lot of people think about Sente. So we think of the local move first, and if it isn't appealing, we do something else, if that makes sense. We're like, oh yeah, we don't want to play here anymore. And that, like I said, it works, and people will Tanuki correctly more and more often as they get stronger. But I think that potentially it's a little bit of a flawed mindset. So I heard saying that the stronger players get, the more they tenuki. However, AI perhaps Q level or low down tenukis more than pros. Yeah. So, and okay, I want to suggest a little bit of an antidote to this, right? To this way of thinking, because like I said, it's dangerous. Because if your perception, if your intuition for whether a move of this size is worth it for this moment in the game, if your intuition is wrong for that, you'll take gote a lot unnecessarily, and this is what happened to me. And a little bit like, let's say, my suggestion, right? And Dave touched on this earlier. It's a healthy habit to consider tenuki first. Because all of you, or I think all of you, have a natural bias towards considering the local move. And I think a good way to counteract that is, can I tenuki? And you'd be surprised at how often the answer is yes. Very often, midway through common Josekis, you can tenuki and that's fine. You know? Like, there's many situations where this is the case. I mean, if you think about any Sansan Joseki, for example, like, here, black can tenuki, you know? Like, here, black can continue, or black can tenuki, you know? Here, white can tenuki, and it's fine. This, very often, even in the middle of normal Joseki sequences, it is perfectly possible to tenuki. So sometimes when you ask this question to yourself, you'll be surprised at how often the choice isn't clear, right? I guess in complicated situations where it's difficult to say if tenuki is possible, falsely tenuking is usually more expensive than falsely answering locally. Yeah, I mean, if it's like life and death or like something complicated, I agree. But after R18, white can tenuki. Yeah, and AI won't even mind it. This is actually playable. It's not very good, but it's like my point is only that it's playable. So white tenukis, black hanes, and then usually white will play here first, I think. Actually, white doesn't have to. Actually, white shouldn't. Okay, so here, and then white can get a group. Like, it's not good, but it's not bad either. It's actually viable, and this is my point. Moves that you'd answer without thinking, you can tenuki and get a playable result. You know? You'd be surprised at how often this happens. And in this particular case, answering is a little bit better, you know? But you'd be surprised at how close it is. I hope my point, I hope that my point is clear in this sense. I actually remember a long time ago, I was discussing a Joseki with a Chinese professional who was teaching some students at the SECO program in China. And in this position, I was like, what should white play? You know? It was like, I don't know what to do here for white. Should I take here or should I take here? And he's like, oh, I think you should tenuki. You know? And then my brain exploded because I hadn't thought of it. So, you know, that you can also technically go to P14 also. And that I, you know, at the time I was a new 5 dan. I was about 15. So yeah. So what I would suggest, to reiterate, to a degree, an antidote to our recency bias, is that first you can consider whether a move elsewhere is useful. Like, our thought process at the moment, and I'll get a slide. I'll get a slide up 1 second. Ooh. So most of the time, right, people think, is my move useful locally? Right? Right, you think of a move locally, and you're like, oh, I like that move, and you play it. Or you think, oh, I don't like that move, let's think of playing somewhere else. You know, so usually, in my opinion, most people switch this order in their heads. And that's dangerous, because that means you're very likely to never consider step 1, where else is my move useful? And that's a very important thing, because actually, if you think about it, the value of moves sort of goes down, right? So locally, very, very often, tenuki is viable, and very often it's best. And that, not considering this option, again, is very dangerous. So what I suggest is, as an exercise, you can consider sometimes thinking, where else is my move efficient on the board? Like, where else, if I were to think about other areas of the board, where would be a cool place to put my move? And then consider, is my move useful locally? And I think if you do it in that order, you're much more likely to make a fair judgment. Because when people revert the steps, like when they change the order, they do step 2, then they play their move and they never do step 1. That also, I pulled up a slide, and then I forgot to change the scene. This is my slide, which I forgot to change the scene for. So yeah, thinking about, so step 1, where else is my move useful? Step 2, is my move useful locally? And I think making step 1 first is very useful. And it's not how we're used to thinking. I'm not even saying you have to think like this or you should think like this. I'm saying you could consider it. Let's say that's sort of the bottom line, right? What if you just think of multiple moves first, then evaluate? I'd love confirmation. We have Najay saying rip in the chat, which isn't a good sign. Now it's back. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Okay, great. We're back. So I was answering Tanja's question. So Tangye was suggesting, well, you could just consider 3 or 4 different moves on the whole board, and that's also a good idea. You just tenuki the question. Yeah, I pretended my internet was down so I wouldn't have to answer the question. No, to answer the question, and I think it's a good question, yeah, you could do that. You could just forget about what the last move is and say, well, where are 3 to 4 big moves on the whole board? That. Yeah, I consider tenuki for it indeed. So, I think that's also a good way. My way, the way I'm suggesting, is just one of the different ways that I think you can sort of safeguard yourself against playing a gote move just because it appeals to you, right? Because this is what I think most people's thought process is. They think, is my move useful locally? And depending on their definition of useful, they'll play a move that's smaller than the alternatives. They don't consider, if we go back to this other slide, the cost of gote, they don't think about this. They don't think about the move could be somewhere else, And they just think about whether they like the move locally. And that's dangerous. So that's sort of the point I wanted to get to, and I hope the idea that will be useful to you guys. So yeah, that's all I prepared in terms of lecture itself. I have a bonus idea for the end, but let's recap quickly, and you guys can ask questions if you have any questions underlying, from the lecture that you might want to ask now. So the point is, right, that from the perspective of stone efficiency, right, the whole board exists, right? Every move could be somewhere else, and you need to think about the opportunity cost of playing a move. And then, throughout the lecture, we discussed maybe why people don't do this, and we looked at some examples of people not doing this. And I hope that you can recognize this in your own games, because I'm sure a lot of you do this. Maybe not all of you, but I think a lot of you have a problem with this, because it's a very human thing. It's a very human problem. This, relating it to the concept of efficiency, a slide that I may or may not have not forgotten, but I was like, I decided not to show it at the time I was thinking of showing it. This other slide, efficiency, right? From the perspective of all of those Joseki variations we looked at, right? You need to consider how much bang you're getting for your buck. Like, you can't just think about, oh, I get this. Efficiency is about profit per stone invested. So that's why I think people tend to slightly overvalue Josekis, and this has happened to me many times, right? As you saw, many of my favorite Josekis end with me having a stone advantage, or me just having gote, right? Taking gote. Right. You have to consider, well, when you evaluate all of these results, well, how many stones were played? Who started the sequence and who ended it, right? So that's the logical way to think about Sente. Finally, we discussed a little bit, well, why do people mess this up, right? Why do we mess this up? I showed some of my own thought processes and how I've gotten this wrong in the past. I think I've really improved at this, and I think that's why I'm a much stronger player now than I was a year ago. It's one of the big reasons. And hopefully you guys can consider a little bit more where else is my move useful first, or you can figure out your own antidote, right? But just be aware that there is a bias, in my opinion, towards the area where the last move is played, and safeguarding against that is actually quite important. So yeah, that's sort of the conclusion for this particular lecture. I remember that you commented on me not taking Sente in some game. Yeah, I very often do. I think in my NGD reviews these days, I talk about Sente every other move or so, because it's a very important consideration, And very often taking Gote is fine, but you just need to be aware when you take it. I think that's the really important part. And actually, my playstyle hasn't changed much. I still take Gote most of the time. That's how I roll. Like I like thick positions, and I don't mind taking Gote. But the big difference is the awareness that Gote has been taken, and I think that's very crucial. Yeah, that's about it. I think now I do want to introduce you to one cool concept, or one concept that I find cool, before we wrap up the lecture. And if you guys have any questions, that's also oh, I have a question. Sorry. Yeah, it's great. It just formulated. Yeah, take your time. And then I want to talk about a little something called Coupon Go at the very end, to just leave you with an idea. In fact, Antti was talking about what is the value of Sente, and in my opinion, this Go variant, Coupon Go, is all about that, So yeah, let's... Coupon Go, while Najee makes this question, is just... You can at any given moment, agree with your opponent that you pass, so it's your opponent's turn instead of yours, but you get a determined amount of points. In other words, it's determining the value of Sente, right? And it's a Go variant I've never actually played, but it's really cool. The idea is really cool, and I think it helps us to think about Sente, because we have to assign a value to it, when we're negotiating with our opponents. So that's one cool idea I can leave you guys with. Najee's question: how do you reconcile taking Gote with influence play? It feels like you automatically let the opponent find a move to reduce your influence. Yeah, this is very interesting, because this sort of goes a little bit to how you play Moyo. Because something, for example, that Jeff taught me when I was starting to play a lot of Moyo was you need to be really quick when you play Moyo. You need to take Sente a lot, and you need to keep up the tempo, I asked, since you really speak out for influence play. Yeah, I do. I value influence quite highly. Or, in my opinion, fairly. Other people don't. That's my opinion, right? Now, so back to what Jeff was teaching me, he was like, well, to play Moyo, you have to be really quick. Like, you have to play really flexibly, and you always have to keep tempo for your stones to make sense together, right? And I see what he means, and that is one way to play Moyo. You keep up a lot of tempo, and you're always in front of your opponent, and that sort of lets you dictate what you do, right? And then you make your big Moyos, and etc., right? That is one way to do it. In my opinion, you can play a very slow, thick Moyo style also. And for this, I'll refer you to my Moyo lecture. I made a lecture on Moyo. And what I discussed in that lecture is that influence is inherently valuable. Like, real influence. I mean, if you just put a bunch of stones on the outside of the board and you call it a Moyo, that doesn't help. Like, if the stones have cutting points, if the stones have weaknesses, that doesn't help. But if you make actual strong shapes, and that doesn't even mean you have to make walls, you just have to make strong shapes, you're not losing anything, right? And this is also, I made a lecture on Fujisawa Shuko, right, who's arguably my favorite professional, and what I really like about his Go was that he didn't hesitate to take Gote to get a strong shape, and then he just made really powerful local shapes, and then he understood sublimely how to use them. And this, in my opinion, this is a viable way to play Go. That's actually how I play Go now, or how I try. You make strong shapes, and strong shapes are inherently valuable. Now, if these strong shapes combine and make a moyo, that's great, you know? That's really good, you know? Fujisawa Shuko, I'll look up his games, he's amazing. There's many other players I could recommend that that are really good at playing with strong shapes. But one thing I like about Shuko is his sheer ambition with these strong shapes sometimes. So he makes really strong shapes, and then he's like, I know how to use this, you know? And it's more powerful than you think it is. So he has a lot of really fun games. Okay. My point is that when you make strong shapes, that's not inherently bad, right? And if your opponent, like Najee is saying, like, oh, what if your opponent dedicates his time to using his Sente to reduce your moyo? That isn't a bad thing. That's only a bad thing if you put all your eggs in one moyo, right? Like, you can just make strong shapes and have a slight territorial deficit and trust that your strong shapes will be useful eventually. And maybe that'll become a moyo, you know? So that if you are playing for the all your eggs in one moyo and just trying to make one huge moyo, you do need to make sure your opponent doesn't interfere with that. But I've actually moved away from that style of moyo because it's really hard to do that. I really like playing the type of game that could turn into a moyo game, but doesn't have to. And that's maybe how I found my peace with being a moyo player who's relatively slow. I don't take Sente often, at least for my level, and I'm relatively fine with just playing a strong shape move that isn't that loses a tempo, you know? And I have faith that these shapes will eventually be useful. So, yeah. Makes sense in theory. I'll see if I can translate it to my play. Well, I would recommend, I mean, if you have time and you want to, you can rewatch parts of both the Moyo lecture and the Fujisawa Shuko lecture, because I touch on this topic quite heavily. So, you know, that's something you could do. From that review of the game of mine that was showed, the Tanuki to the left side struck me, and in recent NGD games I invaded the similar left side, even though strengthening my own side would probably have been better. Haven't yet read review of that game, but we discussed it with an opponent. Oh wait, I think I reviewed that game also, Chaos, right? I think your recent game with the Pavel, I think. I think. So if it's that game, or maybe it's a more recent game, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm glad that you're trying it out, right? Because often when you learn Go, you do something bad because you're trying to do something better. And, you know, you'll make mistakes, but you'll learn. So have fun with that. Yeah. But okay, that's probably all. If nobody has any more questions, I think it's a good place to wrap up the lecture. This was a fun one for me to make. I think from my perspective, I'm really happy I can do this lecture, that I'm confident enough to do this lecture, because I think I've really improved it, Sente. And to reiterate, I have you guys to thank for that, because being a teacher sort of helps me to take responsibility for how I think about these types of concepts. So yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. If any of you are watching that aren't NGD students, I'll mention we are a Go school. We are, maybe people on YouTube, we are a Go school, and you know, we do text reviews and stuff like that, so you can check out our website. And there's also other content that isn't, that, you know, you don't have to pay for. There's interesting articles written by Antti, and you know, there's a lot of stuff. So yeah, thank you to everyone who came out, and yeah, I'll see you guys some other time.